Today on Locked On Canadiens, we talk about the Canadian special teams and how it can get better.
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 1085 of Locked On Canadiens, where we are your first listen of the day. Thank you so much for that. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. My name is Laura Saab, also known as The Active Stick, and I'm joined, as always, by Scott Matlove, Habs Eyes on the Prize. Scott, I don't know about you, but I am melting. I don't even know how to explain what is going on with my hair right now. For those of you watching on YouTube, it is an impossibly hot day here in Montreal, the second in a row. How are you doing? Are you still alive? Are you melted? What's your status?
I woke up and at 7 o'clock this morning and was on the road by 7:15. And by that time, it was already 75 degrees and my entire, just clothes for my workday were stuck to me at that point. Thankfully, it has started to rain ever so slightly to break the humidity because, oh my God, it's stuck to me. Like I'm going to the gym after we record and I'm just like, I could change, but this is already disgusting. So I'm just going to kind of roll with it at that point. And I wipe down the equipment. Don't worry before anyone comes after me for gym etiquette, but oh my God, I can't do humidity. It's just not a thing for me.
It's not. It wasn't even that warm. It was just the humidity was crazy. And for those of you in Montreal, the little bit of rain that Scott is talking about is turning into a massive rainfall warning by the time you're listening to this episode. So everybody watch out. And it doesn't feel like hockey weather. It is truly impossibly hot, but we do have hockey to talk about. The first thing was, real quick, the Laval Rocket made a signing. Super quick update, Scott, and then we'll get into talking about the Montreal Canadiens special teams.
Yeah, I'm going to try to pronounce their last name as best I can. This is one not in either of the languages that I do speak, but from the QMJHL signed to a 2-year contract, 2-way in 2024-2025, 1-way in 2025-2026 is Israel Mianskum, which I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He is actually from one of the Cree territories in Quebec, which I believe makes him one of the few, and Laura, maybe you can correct me on this because I'm not 100% sure, one of the few First Nations players, and I'm not sure if Cree fits into that or not, or they are separate.
Yeah. Indigenous.
Playing in the NHL and in Montreal. So he signed his 2-year AHL contract this morning. Former teammate of Joshua Waugh finished last year with 87 points in 61 games on the Sherbrooke Phoenix, who were, based on my mentions, he finished 30 points higher in scoring than the next closest player on his team, which has, as of right now, no draft picks on it whatsoever. So a pretty solid year on a Phoenix team that didn't seem all that great. I'm not an expert on his game. I know he's been in Canadiens development camp before, so they've definitely seen him before, saw something they liked, maybe when they were scouting Joshua Waugh and beyond. But a nice little bit of, again, depth to add to this roster. We'll see what comes of Josh Nadeau as well in development camp. But I can't complain about adding depth at the ECHL and AHL levels.
Absolutely. And yes, so for Scott and for our non-Canadian listeners, the Cree are the largest group of First Nations in Canada. So real quick, so we wanted to do a quick review of the Canadian special teams before we get into Stanley Cup. So for this segment, Scott, because we don't have a whole lot of time, I did want to focus on the penalty kill because I do believe the power play, because I do believe the penalty kill warrants a little bit more nuanced discussion. So let's start with the power play. I guess, I know, it made us want to die sometimes. I guess the biggest question is, with any power play, is 1, are you using the right personnel? And 2, are you using the right strategy? So would it be fair to criticize the Montreal Canadiens if they just didn't have the right personnel?
I mean, they definitely didn't, considering they had 2.5 centers for most of the year. All respect to Jake Evans, but not a guy I would have on
a power play wave.
On an NHL power play. I would have him on the play in a heartbeat. But losing Kirby Dach really forced them to get creative on the second power play unit, which was usually just, okay, Nick Suzuki, you go play more, because Sean Monahan was on the first unit taking faceoffs for that. And the second power play unit was a mishmash all year. And even the first one changed when they finally put Juraj Slafkovsky on the first unit. Everything started to put together. They finally dropped Josh Anderson to the second unit. You had Caulfield, Slafkovsky, Suzuki with Monahan, sometimes Newhook in that position, sometimes Yoel Armia just as a body, and then Matheson on the point. The second unit didn't have any identity because they didn't have the depth to really fill that out. Sometimes it was Armia and Gallagher and Newhook and Dvorak or Monahan sometimes, and then it was whichever defenseman.
Right.
We Jack Eye.
It was Guy.
It was Guy. We've seen Barron. We've seen Jack Eye. We saw Matheson just play the entire time. It was Lane Hudson at the end of the year. It's something that next year, and this goes with just being healthy again, the team needs to get an identity for that second unit, because you don't want to just run the same one, get nothing, and then your second one's out there to just not get scored on.
Right. And that's the thing too, is that you want it to be aggressive. You want it to be active. You want them to take some risks, right? But with the players that they have, they weren't necessarily the ideal choice. Like, one frustration I had was that I feel like they didn't give Jesse Ylönen enough of a chance, right? And that could have made some magic. But also looking forward to next year. So Scott, this is just an opinion question, right? Because that's not what he's set out to do. Like, he's a third or fourth line center. And I'm talking about Owen Beck. But given his abilities in the face-off dot, would you want to include him in a power play unit? Because I would think he would belong on a penalty kill.
It's hard to say because I don't know how he's going to look against NHL competition right now. If he comes out and can do the job Christian Dvorak does right now, then absolutely sign him up. If he can't, which is fine.
It's not his job, right? We're just, yeah. As a penalty killer, I could absolutely if he adjusts and becomes that face-off guy like they used Monahan for this, I absolutely think he could be a huge part of that as well. It's just, I don't know where he's going to be at the NHL level quite yet. And I want to see that before I declare anything with that. We're talking a lot about being patient and not rushing players. This is part of that. You do not need to rush these guys just because you want them right now at this exact moment. Right. But speaking of not rushing guys, I'm going to rush another guy. Lane Hudson. He's probably going to be one of the options for the Montreal Canadiens. When we're talking about improving the personnel that they have, he's probably going to be key in those scenarios in the years coming.
He's going to be the most important piece of that power play, that if he can adjust, and we've seen him do a pretty good job at the NHL level at 5-on-5 already, if he can adjust to the speed and pace as he was showing already, he's going to be the first power play guy. And I don't mind dropping Matheson back for that, to give Matheson a break and to let Hudson use his creativity there. He's a completely different look than Mike Matheson. Matheson has
much more creative.
And that's not to say that Matheson is not and doesn't have the agility and things to make things happen. Lane Hudson just somehow, until they get a read on what he's going to do, is hard to contain because you can't always just catch him. You think you might, and he's gone. Exactly.
And that's the thing. And none of this is a knock on Mike Matheson, but how great would it be for like their first wave option to be Lane Hudson? That to me is my, you don't know. Like I'm thinking you need the second wave much less frequently if you do that. And then speaking of waves, et cetera, we do want to get to our Stanley Cup predictions and talking about like what our rooting interests are for the Stanley Cup final. But we do have to talk a little bit about the penalty kill and its improvement over the course of that year, last year. And that is coming up in just, the heat ate my brain. I'm sorry. That's coming up in just a moment, everybody. But first, this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Why do we love Game Time? Because generally, getting tickets for events used to be impossible, difficult, annoying, cumbersome, expensive, etc., etc. But now there's Game Time. And let me tell you about what Game Time brings to the table, especially if you're looking for some sort of special event, like, you know, the NBA Finals, Major League Baseball, NHL, Stanley Cup Final that's going on now. You find Game Time, because Game Time makes getting tickets faster and easier. You can get last minute tickets. They always have flash deals, zone deals. It's easy to find and buy tickets for any kind of event in your area. And you can get the view from your seat like before you buy, so you know what you're getting into. They have the lowest price guarantee, and there's so much more. And I think my biggest thing with Game Time is the all-in pricing, because you don't get surprise fees at checkout. It's not like, you know, you buy a ticket and then you find out you're paying $25 more in fees. All in pricing lets you know right away what you are going to be paying, and you see your seat. You know everything going into it. No surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Scott, we talked about the power play. I wanted to spend a little bit more time on the penalty kill because it improved over the course of this past year. So let's talk about how they started out just feeling hopeless for both their special teams. And part of it is because the defense of this team still doesn't really have an identity. It's mostly because, you know, the players that they're expecting to play there in the future haven't made the team yet, right? The way that they have been handling Reinbacher, he does seem to be like he's going to be one of the anchors of the defense. You know, they've got Caden Gooley, who's had a lot of injury issues, but who we do have a lot of faith in reaching his potential. They've got, obviously, Logan Mailloux was tearing it up in the AHL last year, and then they have to see if his game will translate. And for me, the thing I'm most excited about is Lane Hutson, right? So their defensive core as a whole doesn't necessarily have all that much of an identity right now, but the future is something to feel excited about. But the penalty kill isn't only about defense. It's also about what forwards you play on there. And I found that over the course of the year, and I mean, it was even evident in the numbers, right? Like after the trade deadline, the Canadiens, I think, were a top 5 penalty kill all the way throughout the end of the season. And for a while, they were the top, for a few weeks after February 28th. So I think, you know, there was a lot of work that went into that. And I believe, and Scott, you might disagree with me, I think it all comes down to Martin St. Louis really emphasizing the little things in the game. So maybe the defense itself didn't acquire an identity, but each player doing the little things right, they were able to keep the puck out of the net. And obviously, goaltending, you cannot discount goaltending.
So just to kind of put a bow on what Laura was saying here, the Canadiens finished in the bottom third for penalty killing at 76.5%. Down there also noted, you know, not good teams: the Islanders, the Ducks, the Wild, the Senators, the Sharks, the Blackhawks, the Blue Jackets, and the Coyotes. But just behind playoff teams like the Leafs, the Predators, and the Jets. They did get better as the year went on, and some of that came from the goalies just stopped more pucks.
Right.
Namely Caden Primo and Samuel Montembeault. And the biggest thing is that I look at the top penalty killing teams in the league here, and they play a style that is smothering. The Hurricanes and the Kings are the top there. They just play this heavy possession-based game, and the Canadiens do not have the ability to, you know,
possess the puck.
Yeah, like that. It also doesn't help. The Canadiens were also one of the least disciplined teams in the league this year. Not as bad as like Anaheim, Florida, but they finished with 825 penalty minutes, which places them in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Top 8 for the league there.
They definitely
and some of that
were undisciplined.
They were undisciplined, but also some of that is, are you actually calling that? Or we went through a streak where it's like you can't seriously be calling that kind of thing there. And some of those penalty minutes are challenges for goaltender interference or offside or whatnot. I look at this as a team that if they want to be successful and they want to play a chippy, hard-nosed style where you're going to take some penalties, that's a thing that you will do, is that you need to dial in this penalty kill to be, let's say, 3 or 4 points better. Get to an even 80%, and if you can get to 80%, you are in the top half of the league for penalty killing. Pittsburgh was at 80.7, Colorado at 70. There's a lot of good teams in that range there. A couple of points makes all the difference from we're getting shellacked to, oh, wow, look at this defensive structure here. And some of that is the maturation of guys on defense. Can Caden Gooley take that next step? Can David Reinbacher eventually step in and fill that role? Can Arbor Jackeye stay out of the box and become that? Can they get a second penalty killing center? Can Nick Suzuki not always be that guy? Because right now he is. Jake Evans was also there for that. Sean Monahan for a little bit. I just really would like this team to really kind of fix that a little bit, because it's the same thing. There's someone open by the back door, and there's someone, Matheson or Savard, who has wandered away from them. Little itty bitty things in this, like focus to details, can be all the difference in the world. They had 7 shorthanded goals this year, right in the middle of the pack, same amount as the Oilers, who are playing in the Stanley Cup final, and 1 less than the Panthers, who are playing in the Stanley Cup final. Philadelphia somehow had 16. I won't understand that ever, but not my team. Russ and Rachel can figure that one out. More so than the power.
Oh my God, we should have them on soon.
Yes, more so than the power play. Getting the penalty kill is what needs to be fixed, because you can't go into the penalty kill and face 13 shot attempts and hope that Montembeault or Primo or whomever bails you out. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, games get out of hand real early.
And not to give us all, re-traumatize us all, but back in 2011, the Boston Bruins literally won the Stanley Cup, and their power play was terrible. It's much easier to find scoring than it is to undo goals against, right? So that's my biggest thing. And you can't rely on your goalie, because as the Montreal Canadiens have proven, you can't win with just your goalie. You can't. You can have literally the best goaltender in the world for a decade, and you still can't win. So you can't rely 100% on that. But also the part of the penalty kill is that, and I want to say it might have been Jesse Marshall. It's somebody that did a study on being aggressive on the penalty kill, was giving people was turning into even not just shorthanded goals, but was turning into offensive chances as soon as you went back to even strength, right? So you can leverage that. If you get the momentum by having that penalty kill, you can turn it around, transition it into an offensive game. And I'm sorry if I'm crediting the wrong person. I will try and find this information and share it with everybody. In the meantime, I did want to say, please send us some mailbag questions. I almost forgot, because tomorrow's our mailbag episode. We actually got a really funny email that I cannot wait to read to all of you. But I want more emails. Send us the questions to lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. You can also leave them in the YouTube comments. Richard the Architect, I did see that you left one there. And you can also tweet them to us at LO_Canadians, or send them to us via DM, LO_Canadians on Twitter. We want your topic ideas. We want your questions. We want to discuss what you want to discuss. And like I said, I've got some great questions so far, but we need more. We want a really fun episode. So thank you so much. And in the meantime, we did want to talk about our Stanley Cup rooting interests, and if there are any learnings for the Habs from the Stanley Cup teams. And that's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens. All right, Scott, I have to tell you, I did not expect the Oilers to be in the Stanley Cup final. I also felt like I jinxed because every team I was rooting for ended up getting kicked out. But I feel like I wanted the Dallas Stars to make the final, and I wanted them to win because I really like the way they've built their team. And I know we've discussed this previously in previous episodes, but it feels like it's finally the Oilers' time. What do you think?
I hope it's not. Their fan base and the media covering them, including the former head and the current head of the PHWA, deserve nothing for any of this. I am of two minds with this, is that Florida has done a good job with actually drafting some of their talent and sticking by that. You know, guys like Sasha Barkov, finding market inefficiencies, like finding Carter Verhaeghe, making that trade for Matthew Tkachuk, where they traded Jonathan Huberdeau and God, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head right now, but regardless, that making these trades coming off career years for players and going for it, is that I hate playing the Florida Panthers because, one, they will beat you up, and then they will just beat you on the scoreboard too, because they are a surprisingly well-coached team.
And they're relentless.
I don't truly believe in Paul Maurice as much as other people, but I look at what Florida has done is that they can weather the storm. Sergei Bobrovsky in recent years has been incredible, and then they can just strike goal after goal with Reinhart, with Bennett, with a guy like Evan Rodriguez, Carter Verhaeghe, Barkov, Tkachuk. On defense, guys like Gustav Forsling, Brandon Montour, Aaron Ekblad, etc. They're deep, and they've built this team in a way that looks like it should be a Stanley Cup contender. Edmonton drafted much of their top talent, and that is exactly it. But when you're crap for a decade, you should finally hit on some things. You have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, you have Leon Draisaitl, you have Connor McDavid, and then also Evan Bouchard is in there. And for the longest time, they just tried to get by on just pure talent, and they couldn't because they didn't have a goalie. I still don't really think they have a goalie in this series. Their options are an AHL call-up or a guy who is inconsistent at best. Edmonton, however, then went out and added some other pieces in front of that. They went out and got Matthias Ekholm. They had added Brett Kulak again. They seemingly got, some depth pieces to help get them through here. And it's going to be, can depth win out over two of the best players in the world in this? Because it feels like it's McDavid and Draisaitl dragging the rest of the Oilers along. Whereas with the Panthers, it's just death by 1,000 cuts. It's a huge split. And that if I'm looking at the way these teams go, if you draft high-end talent, surround that high-end talent with other pieces, but you're not always going to get a Connor McDavid or a Leon Draisaitl in the draft. And if that's the case, build your depth so strong that you cannot overcome that when it's just wave after wave after wave of just skill in your face all the time.
Well, that's it. And it is your responsibility. If you get lucky enough to get your Connor McDavids and your Leon Draisaitl's, it is your responsibility to build up around them. But in the absence of that, it's not like the Florida Panthers have no stars, but they don't have Connor McDavid. They don't have Leon Draisaitl. But what they have done and what they've succeeded in doing is being a team that is extremely tough to play against. Because I think with the Oilers, as much skill as they have, you can sometimes contain them. And so for me, I'm trying to figure out what happens if you take an immovable object and then add something very movable and then see what happens. I'm excited. I think it's going to be an extremely tough final. I think there's going to be a lot of annoying things that come out of it. At the end of the day, though, as much as I hate Florida, I am rooting for them because I do not want to hear all of the narratives about the Canadian teams winning the Stanley Cup and the Oilers brought the cup back to Canada, and then everybody's going to be cheering for them or against them, or the debates and the narratives. I don't want any of that. I would rather the Florida Panthers win, and I would rather hate them instead.
And here's the thing is that it's who deserves to win this? Does Connor... This is the narrative that I don't want to hear, is that hockey needs Connor McDavid to win a Stanley Cup to keep it going forward. I don't care whether or not he ever wins a cup. Sometimes good players don't win Stanley Cups. Sometimes great players don't win Stanley Cups. That's a fact in the matter of life. He has the talent to absolutely drag this team there on his own, and he's pretty much done that this offseason. And if he does, great. I look at what Florida has done from being the joke of the league where, wow, they're terrible. More fans are in their arena. They've got 3,500 people, whatever it is, to being one of the powerhouse franchises here. the funniest outcome of this, and for everyone who remembers the Battle of Alberta at its peak, Matthew Tkachuk loves playing the Oilers because there is no one that gets that team crawling further in their skin than Matthew Tkachuk. And now they've surrounded him with a team of other players who do not give a crap who is on your side. And he is going to be at full feral rat boy in this. And I mean that in the most sincere, heartfelt way possible. I love that. Last year, he was hurt bad in the Stanley Cup final. Was not a factor because he was completely injured along with other players on that team. They have that motivation now after losing to Vegas. And then this. And the funniest thing, because I know exactly who's been writing all those articles about how we should, Canada's team and christen the Oilers and they deserve this. There will be nothing funnier to me than a non-traditional market beating the Canadians' best hope, for winning a Stanley Cup here. One, Canada's team does not exist. All the Canadian franchises hate each other. Stop it.
Canada's team is only in the Olympics, in the World Championships, in the World Juniors, and even then we hate most of those people and treat them terribly.
I was going to say, Hockey Team Canada is the Canadians' women team because Hockey Canada on the men's side should be burned to the ground.
Absolutely.
But there's so many funny narratives that can happen out of this game. I am cheering for Florida. I want to see Florida win this because them winning a Stanley Cup is actually
hilarious.
Very enjoyable.
It's objectively hilarious.
It is, and it's actually really good for the game of hockey. We talk about how guys like Auston Matthews getting drafted, have helped build the foundations in Arizona. And like the California teams being strong and the growth in Southern California for hockey. What is a Stanley Cup for the Florida Panthers, in addition to the ones Tampa Bay has already won, going to do for hockey in the state of Florida? Like, that's a big deal. And here's the thing is, I want to see what the Oilers do if they don't win this. Like, if Florida comes out and just blows their doors off, what do you do now? This was your best shot, and you didn't do it.
I also would get really excited for Matthew Tkachuk Stanley Cup Day. I wonder how many diseases the Cup is going to get that day.
It's Florida. There's nothing that could be done that Tampa Bay didn't already do. So,
and on that note, all right. So Scott, we are objectively both rooting for Florida, even though they are a division rival and constantly bully the Montreal Canadiens. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. All right. I'm glad we're on the same page, and we want to hear from you. If you guys think we're wrong and we should be cheering for the Oilers, please go ahead and tell us. Tell it to us, lockedoncanadians@gmail.com. You can leave it in the YouTube comments. Also, if you want us to bring something up in the mailbag, please put MBQ at the beginning because we get a lot of YouTube comments. Also, you can tweet us at LO_Canadians or send us DMs. We want your questions. Send us mailbag questions. We'll be back for that mailbag tomorrow. Scott, you had a point?
We need our predictions.
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. I think it's going to go to 6 games and Florida's going to win it. And there's going to be lots of injuries.
Well, see, now it's lame because I was going to say Florida in 6 games to give Edmonton credit so they don't yell at me in my mentions again. I think that this is going to be I think it's going to be a lot of goals. I don't think you're going to see like an instant defensive classic in this. But I look at how the Oilers against a tired Dallas team got 2 goals on 3 shots and then did nothing.
Right.
Not even play defense because they gave up a ton of shots. If you do that to Florida, they are going to eat you alive like one of the meth-infested gators living there. So I'm very curious to see which Oilers team shows up. The one that looks like a runaway freight train or the one that cannot get out of its own way defensively or in net. If Stuart Skinner's off, this series is over in 3.
Yeah. But to be safe, we're both predicting Panthers in 6. And also, I swear we did not discuss this beforehand. I didn't even know what Scott was going to say. I didn't know what I was going to say. Anyway, remember, lockedoncanadians@gmail.com for mailbag questions, LO_Canadians for our Twitter account, and you can leave questions in the YouTube as well. Subscribe, like, share, tell your friends, and we will talk to you tomorrow.